Good morning. Buenos días. Bienvenidos. Welcome. So I'll try not to shout. I just wanted to get your attention. So my name is Georgiana Melendez. Pronouns are she, her, hers, ella. I am the Assistant Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at UMass Boston. I'm also a double beacon for those beacons in the room, and will soon to be beacons. It's my job today to get the program kicked off and to keep us on time because you know we can talk. So don't be surprised if I'm sort of waving at some of the speakers to move through because we have a lot we want to cover today. We really want to celebrate and just spend this time together bonding. And before I get into that, I do want to give some shout outs, right? So this morning was planned by a group of folks, definitely not representative of all of the folks on campus who could have helped and who could be there, but we all have so many things that we're organizing. This is a group of folks who thought, you know, we have to do something special, something that recognizes intersectionality, something that celebrates us and increases some visibility of our cultures on campus. So this is one of many events that are happening through Hispanic Heritage Month, through the year. So I do want to give a special shout out to Cynthia Orellana. Please stand up, woman. Yes. You know, we try to come together and share things equally, but it never really ever happens, and there's usually one person who's a rock star. She's a rock star extraordinaire. So thank you, Cynthia, for all of your extra. In addition to Cynthia, I want to thank the Academic Support Services Department in Undergraduate Education, Black Life, the Gaston Institute, the McCormick Graduate School, Racial Equity Task Force, the Office of Community Partnerships, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Trotter Institute for sponsoring today's event. So I also, because I have your ear, and as the DEI person on campus, want to mention a couple of things about this month of October. It is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I know in our community we tend not to get screenings, and I'm going to say no matter what, you know, whether it's breast cancer screening, prostate cancer, get your screenings. Early detection saves lives. October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and in Nuestra Comunidad, we don't often talk about that. But I want you to know that there are services and support, and if you ever need to get support, reach out to someone if you're on campus, in the Dean of Students' office, in my office, and if you're in the community, there is a SafeLink hotline at Casa Mirna Vasquez. So, oh, and the other major, and it's not an O, the other major acknowledgement for this month is it's Disability Awareness Month. So we are all, you know, we have multiple identities, and we walk in this space carrying all of them. So just wanted to bring that to your attention and make sure that you know that you have support and then should always access the resources that you can. So I'm in the way of you and the rest of the program, so I'm gonna put my glasses on. We have a special welcome. Unfortunately, the Chancellor we knew before we planned the event that he was not gonna be here this week. This is just the best week we could select for the date. So we did ask him to send a message to you, and we have a recording that is going to play.
Good morning, buenos días, and welcome. Bienvenidos to our Nuestra Historia celebration. My name is Marcelo Suarez Orozco, and I have the deep honor and unique responsibility to serve as Chancellor of UMass Boston. I want to first thank Assistant Chancellor Georgiana Melendez in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Cynthia Orellana in the Office of Community Partnerships for their leadership in bringing us together to honor Hispanic Heritage Month. My thanks as well to our host organizations, the amazing Gaston Institute, Black Life, the Trotter Institute, and other units across our university for collaborating to make this festive and important occasion possible. I am pleased to offer a few words of welcome before you move on into what I know will be an uplifting conversation about the Afro Latinx experience. We all know the new demographic normal in Boston, the Commonwealth, and elsewhere in our country. The growing Hispanic Latinx population and the corresponding rise of Hispanic Latinx influence in all sectors of American society, from the economy to the arts to the humanities to politics. It is the new mainstream. Nuestra historia es un hermoso tapiz de todos colores y hoy celebramos nuestros hermanos y hermanas Afro Latinx. It is also well established that UMass Boston has a long and proud history as a leading institution in higher education, embracing, cultivating, and benefiting from our diversity. We are the third most diverse campus in our country, a minority-serving institution where 59% of our students are first generation. Over 150 countries are represented in our campus, and over 100 languages are spoken. UMass Boston is, of course, well positioned for diversity. Our approach to education is premised in part on the exquisite value of intercultural competence and the insights offered by intersecting identities and different life experiences. The wealth of culturally based academic resources at UMass Boston certainly reflects this. Our Hispanic Latinx academic offerings are second to none. UMass Boston is home to, among other resources, one of the oldest Latino studies program in New England, the highest number of Latinx professors in the region, the Mauricio Gaston Institute for Latino Community Development, and a very active, very vibrant Casa Latinx student organization. To our students, muchas gracias. Indeed, our distinction is demonstrated by our advocacy for equality and inclusion and meeting all students where they need to be to succeed. And we thrive as a community of people who learn from each other and from life experiences that are different from our own. We are also proud to be a community-engaged institution that promotes the economic, social, and cultural well-being of Boston and our communities, communities in which our university is deeply, deeply embedded. UMass Boston, through our research and community engagement, is at the forefront of improving educational outcomes to youth from historically marginalized groups and making Boston's public schools more reflective of the city's racial, geographic, and economic diversity. Our partnership with the Boston Public Schools, where 43% of the students are Hispanic, remains a top priority, and it brings together a collaborative community of UMass Boston faculty, students, researchers, and community partners committed to equity, excellence, and improvement across the K-12 public education. The Commonwealth's Hispanic Latinx community might ask, are we there yet? The answer is no, we are not. Data indicate that in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Hispanic Latinx poverty, unemployment, food security rates are higher than national rates. We need to do better, and we will do better. Academic scores for Latinx students in the Commonwealth are lower than those of their peers in other states. Again, we need to do better. The quest for equity remains unfinished business. That said, we are making progress, in large part because of our dedication to education, which continues to play an essential role helping Hispanic Latinx community secure better health care and socioeconomic opportunity and mobility. Let me close with this. As a person of Latino heritage, I grew up believing that there is never only one right way. Culture is a limitless wellspring of knowledge, of perspective, of imagination, of sensibilities. If we encounter the world with our eyes wide open y el corazón abierto, there is much we can learn from other cultures. By recognizing the talents and gifts that exist in all communities, a promising future, a better future, is always possible. And that is why today we celebrate such a wonderful occasion, Nuestra Historia. My best wishes to all of you. I hope you have an enlightening discussion. Muchas, muchas gracias.
So, bienvenidos a todos. Buenos días. Professor Lorna Rivera. I teach Latino Studies, and it's a real honor to be here with you today to just say a few remarks as well, to give us a little bit of background and some context. We at the Gaston Institute did a report 2 years ago with the Trotter Institute, where we were looking at the experiences as well and the socioeconomic outcomes of Afro-Latinos in Massachusetts. And what we know is that Afro-Latinos in Massachusetts make up more than 5% of the state's Latino population, and that this population has really been increasing by 57% since 2009. But among those that do identify as Afro-Latinos, the majority are Puerto Rican and Dominican, 75% of Afro-Latinos, Dominican and Puerto Rican. And most Afro-Latinos in Massachusetts live in the greater Boston area. But what do we mean by Afro-Latinos? And it's great that there's so many students here, because this is one of the first books that came out, a reader on Afro-Latinidad. And their definition is that Afro-Latinos are people of African descent in Mexico, Central and South America, and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, and by extension, those of African descent in the United States, whose origins are in Latin America and in the Caribbean. And what's important here is that distinction between that we often make is, we think of race and ethnicity as the same thing, and we have to really think about how ethnicity refers to how individuals are associated with social groups based on their cultural markers, their language, their religion, customs, traditions, food, geography, but that within ethnic groups like Latinos, right, physical appearances vary widely, and that race is a social construction. And race is always about maintaining social hierarchies based on physical differences or presumed physical differences from ancestral lineage. But racial groups, unlike ethnic groups, have no single culture. Across all the different cultures, having racialized physical markers does create common experiences of social marginalization. as well as common experiences of solidarity. So what do we know from our research on Afro-Latinos is that these communities suffer from invisibility, misrepresentations, marginalization, racism, and racism within Latinx communities, as we're seeing in the disgraceful behavior of the Los Angeles city councils. We also know, though, that Afro-Latinx communities are hubs of cultural innovation, civic leadership, economic resilience, political organization, and we have strong, deep-rooted diasporic networks. And today, we are here to celebrate the strong tradition of Afro-Latinx political advocacy, cross-cultural movements, and community organizing that has generated solidarity amongst Black and Brown communities across the United States. And so I just want to end with sharing a resource that we do have a report as well as a webinar that you can access off the Gaston's website, which would also have some amazing speakers reflecting on their experiences as Afro-Latinos in Massachusetts. So I just want to thank everyone again for coming, and we're looking forward to the discussion today. So now I'm going to invite our superstar, Cynthia Orellana, who's the director of our Office of Community and University Partnerships, to kick off the rest of the program. So thank you.
Buenos días. Buenos días. Welcome to your public research university. For those of you who are coming from outside of our campus, this is your university, and we're so happy that you're with us this morning. As Lorna mentioned, my name is Cynthia Orellana. I'm the director of the Office of Community Partnerships at UMass Boston. And before I proceed, I do want to give one shout out to our photographer, Vanya Arroyo, who I'm very happy is here with us today. She's our guest photographer for the day. Please give her a round of applause. And also smile for the camera. But thank you so much, Vanya, for being with us today. But it is my distinct pleasure and honor to be the one that gets to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers and our moderator for what I think will be undoubtedly a very captivating, very thoughtful, and very transformative discussion on the experiences of Afro-Latinx people and the contributions that they've made to our past, our present, and our future. Among many of the iconic songs by Afro-Boricua composer and salsa singer Ismael Rivera is a song titled Las Caras Lindas, The Beautiful Faces. An excerpt of the lyrics reads, Somos la melaza que ríe, la melaza que llora. Somos la melaza que ama y en cada beso es conmovedora. Por eso vivo orgulloso de su colorido. Somos betún amable, de clara poesía. Tienen su ritmo, tienen su melodía, las caras lindas de mi gente negra. Now Google Translate, because I can't really translate all of this so hopefully Google didn't do a bad job, says that what I just said is we are the molasses that laughs, the molasses that cries. We are the molasses that loves, and in each kiss it's moving. That's why I live proud of its color. We are kind bitumen of clear poetry. They have the rhythm, they have melody, the pretty faces of my Black people. The group of individuals that will be sharing their knowledge, their experiences, and their reflections are indeed caras lindas, y un orgullo de nuestra gente. They are beautiful faces indeed, and they are the pride of our people, but they're also beautiful minds and souls and hearts. They're an intergenerational and cross-national, multicultural group of inspiring leaders in our Latinx and greater community, and they span several different fields. One of the things that they have in common is their proactive pursuit and activation of social justice and social change. From law, policy, planning, and public service to entrepreneurship, education, and housing justice, philanthropy, arts and culture, and diversity and inclusion, our featured guests span a wealth of combined experiences that honestly give me a lot of great hope for our city and our Commonwealth, but also a lot of joy because I know that these folks come into their work as their whole selves, and the way that they choose to show up in the world, I think is really inspiring as humans, but also as people who are constantly transgressing systemic boundaries. I want to invite each of them to come to the podium as I call their name. Their bios are in the program, so I'm not going to read all their bios. You can read them in the program. But I'm going to invite, starting with our featured panelists, Dennis Benzan, attorney and business owner of La Fábrica LLC. Marie Frances Rivera, president of the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center. Yeah, Beyasmin Jimenez, Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Culture at Northeastern University's Planning, Real Estate, and Facilities. La Doctora, you know we always have to emphasize this, La Doctora Mariel Novas, the Patty Jonathan Kraft, Chief of Learning and Community Engagement at the Museum of Fine Arts. And Carlos Maynard, assistant professor at Bunker Hill Community College and longtime partner of the Gaston Institute. Welcome home. And finally, our special guest facilitator, a local legend, my friend, mentor, and family, chosen family, Mr. Jose Masso, principal of JCM, the Third Consulting LLC, and host, producer, and curator of Con Salsa on WBUR 90.9 FM. So you can come up, Mr. Masso. So together they are going to engage in a 1-hour discussion that's going to be followed by a moderated question and answer session with the attendees. So again, thanks so much for being here today, and thank you all for being here today. Really enjoyed the program.
Big round of applause, please, for Cindy. Good morning. Good morning. Buen dia. You all look so beautiful. God bless you. You know, Cindy quoted a song written by the great Catalino Tite Cubre Alonso from Guayama, Puerto Rico, in the house. Sung by the great, illustrious Ismael Maelo Rivera. And that song would be similar, for those of you who are my age, to having heard James Brown singing, "I'm Black and I'm Proud." For those of you who are my age, you remember when that song came out, what that meant for those of us of African descent. When Maelo sang that song, which has been recorded numerous times by numerous people, including Susana Baca from Peru, people from Cuba, and other places, and you heard him say, "Las caras lindas de mi gente negra son un desfile de melas en flor, que cuando pasa frente a mí se alegra de su negrura todo su corazón." I get chills with that song because it speaks to who I am. It speaks to who I am. And so before we get into a deep conversation and I ask you questions this morning, let me set the stage by saying the following. I was born August 5th, 1950. I just celebrated my 72nd birthday. I was born in Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. My nationality is Puerto Rican. Since 1917, because of the Jones Act passed by Congress of the United States, Puerto Ricans, regardless where we are born, are U.S. citizens. So therefore, my citizenship is that of the United States of America. I am an African descendant. My race is black. My ethnicity is Afro-Boricua. I identify myself as an Afro-Puerto Rican. I take my hat off in front of each and every one of you because if at any moment during the last 47 years you have tuned into Con Salsa on WBUR 90.9 FM, you will hear me say, I present the very best in Afro Latin music. That was purposeful, of which I will talk about later. So let me take off my hat and bow and say thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to go left to right. I'm not going to ask you a question. I'm just going to ask you to do the same thing I just said. Share with us how you identify Dennis Benson.
Good morning, everyone. I first want to thank Jose, thank UMass for giving me this opportunity to be here with this distinguished panel. My name is Dennis Benson. I want to just say before I identify who I am in terms of my identity that identity is very, very complicated and very profound. And identity goes back to, if you were to pull out the US Constitution, I've been a practicing attorney for 18 years, and the Constitution tells us everything that we need to know about what race meant in this country and to the world. The US Constitution says that people of African descent were 3/5 human for purposes of taxation. I grew up in a community where I needed to identify as phenotypically as black, and I needed to identify as Puerto Rican and Dominican. And that's who I identify as today. I attended historically black college, and so for me, identity has many characteristics. And I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that later. But identity is incredibly complicated, and it involves a number of different things for me. And I hope to be able to share with you a little later.
You have a microphone?
I have a microphone. We're going to share.
All right, good.
Thank you, though.
By the way, full transparency, my cousin. Just so you know.
Cousin.
All right? And I have another cousin in the back. Andrea's back there.
Oh, no. Oh. Well,
So
we
my
should
family's
meet.
my
We should
family's in the
meet.
house.
Okay,
Anyway, go ahead.
familia. My name is Marie Frances Rivera. I tend to speak, but I tend not to speak about issues so personal to me. So this is a really big moment for me, and to be with familia is great. So Marie Frances Rivera, I was born in Puerto Rico, and shortly after I was born, my mom and I moved to Florida, and then I grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. So I grew, I would say, distant from my Afro-Latino roots, but my mom always made it very clear to me that éramos negro, right? We were black. So there was no confusion about that. And I've spent, the 30-something years of my life at this point connecting back with those roots and trying to figure out what it means and trying to figure out, my mother looked like me, right? She was dark-skinned like me, and so was my grandmother. But on my father's side, who was Puerto Rican, they were light-skinned. But then there was another part of my family that looked kind of Taíno, like indigenous. And me piecing that back together for myself and connecting with different parts of my family and really understanding the, ¿cómo se llama? Mezcla, the molasses, right, of our people, has been something that has been a really deep and inspiring journey for me. And I just want to say that I brought our ancestor, who has since passed, Benito Masso, into the room. He wrote this book maybe about 10, 15 years ago at this point, Negro, este color que me queda bonito, black, this color that looks good on me, looks beautiful on me. So bringing him into this space as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Where in Puerto Rico were you born? Tell people where you were born. Where I was born? Yes.
Where I was born, in Puerto Rico, Santurce.
Puerto Rico. Bella.
Hey everyone, oh my goodness, my heart is fluttering right now. I am so happy to be here. Thank you, Cynthia, and the entire team at UMass Boston for bringing us together and for grounding us in this space. And of course, Jose, I already knew you were gonna come with the fire, but man. My name is Bella Jimenez. I use the she series pronouns, and this is also very touching for me because I think many of us who are sitting here together have had to actively fight to proclaim our identity. So for me, it is also deeply, deeply personal. And I think about my abuela, who is someone that definitely couldn't really say that she was negra. She was working in the homes of people who definitely wouldn't have, enjoyed her saying something like that. I identify as Dominican and Haitian. So a few years ago, I spent a summer in Dominican Republic with my grandmother. And she came to me in the way that only grandmothers can, in a really, quiet, hushy way, and saying like, tengo un secreto de decirte, and it was like, your grandfather was Haitian, and, she came through this whole story, and I was like, it was like a big gasp. And it was like such a big deal for her to tell me that, my grandfather wasn't Dominican, that he was Haitian, was born in Haiti, and had immigrated like so many Haitians do to that part of the island. So I've really been purposeful in reclaiming that side. Because I know that there's still a lot of work to do, and I'm really proud of the network of people like Dr. Novas and Marie Francis, who I can have these conversations with, but I know it's unique oftentimes in our Latino community to be able to encompass all of these complexities at once. I was born in La Romana. In La Romana, thanks Bad Bunny for making our, is now, now people know what La Romana is, but La Romana is a place where Afro-Dominicans, like people, darker than me and Dennis, and that's just who we are. Dominicans come in all shapes and sizes, just like many, many Latinos do. So again, it's been definitely a journey. The girls next to me are wearing the afro out. That's usually how I wear my hair too. I just got, my little blow dry. And that was a big part of me, like reclaiming my identity too, was like dejé el alisado. I left the relaxer. I started wearing my hair natural. I did the big chop. And I will tell you, the first day that I went to Thanksgiving with my hair like that, all of the tias were like, y esta que le pasó? Like, oh, she left the house like that, with that big hair like that? So it's just been a journey, and I've had plenty of endless conversations with people in my family about what it means to be Black, what it means to be negra, what it means to be Afro-Dominican, what it means to reclaim that side. And it's a continuing conversation, just like many others. So grateful to be here.
Thank you. Doctora.
Wow. Buenos días a todo, and thank you to UMass for having me here. I feel incredibly blessed. This is not what a lot of panels I sit on usually look like. So my heart is just super full, and my mind swimming in thoughts, because there are pieces that each of you have said already that sort of resonate deeply with me. So let's just see what comes out. I'm just gonna go for it. If you had asked me that question, Jose, at various points in my life, I would have answered differently at each and every one of those points. And I think what Dennis said is really important to underscore, which is there's a context aspect to this. There's like a, what is your surrounding and how did it inform the way you saw yourself that is critical in sort of this question of identity and fluidity within identity. Yo nací en Santo Domingo, en la capital, and I moved here with my family when I was 5 years old to Boston, to Jamaica Plain. At each step throughout sort of my own life trajectory, I've sort of evolved and expanded the definition of who I am. Mm-hmm. So for most of my childhood and sort of into adolescence, yo era dominicana. I was like, I was born there. Like it was very kind of clear cut for me. And then I received a scholarship to attend private school outside of Boston at a school that was predominantly very white, very wealthy. In that school, you could count the number of Latinos between 7th and 12th grade in one hand. So it was a very black-white binary in that space, and I felt that I had to claim my Latinidad. I had to say that I was Dominican. And so it created this very strange loop in my head that made me think those identities had to be mutually exclusive. If I was Dominican, I couldn't be Black. And then the Black kids would tell me, you're not Black. Look at your hair. And so there's a lot of also in-group and across folks of color dynamics here that are very real. And I think, I hope we move at some point in the conversation into conversations around Latinx Black relationships and sort of how we coalition build and how we ally and sort of the unique role that those of us who carry both identities play as sort of standing in the gap. So I had to learn, through my education, especially going to college, that I am Black too. And that was a little bit dangerous, as Bella is alluding to, because there's the context of family at play as well. Even though my mom looks, my complexion, there's a whole rainbow of sort of colors in my family, and we don't claim Black, right? And so it wasn't until I was away from my family that I was getting to know others like me and many others not like me. I went to Yale University for undergrad, and the majority of Latinos at my school were of Mexican descent. And so what that did for me was sort of once again warp, like, well, who am I when, whenever I open my mouth to speak and speak Spanish, heads are turning like this because they're not understanding how somebody with my skin color could be speaking Spanish de la isla. And so it was at that point in college that I started understanding that there's a lot more to my Latinidad that cannot simply be captured by a sort of broad brushstroke Latino experience. There's a lot about how I've lived my life and how I walk the world that very much mirrors the Black experience. And so I had to start sort of developing a largeness within myself that could account for the aspects of me that are sort of la inmigrante and the Spanish speaker, but also the Black woman with the coily hair and all the rest. And so it's very highly complicated. I think today I just allow myself to claim whatever I want whenever I want because it's my life. So I'm Dominican, I'm Afro-Caribbean, I'm Latina, I'm all the things, I'm Black. And it's exciting to be able to sort of walk in all of those and feel like I can embody all of that. And so I think the challenge comes in how we are able to educate the context in which we are in to be large enough to receive us. And that includes our families. And so I'll try to wrap up and just sort of, you spoke about hair, which is always, we out here contentious. But like within my family, I feel like I've had to be an educator to my own mother, to my tias, in terms of, why am I doing this? What is it about sort of reclaiming my natural pattern that is so gratifying and sort of returns to me, to the point that like, even though my mom was like, "Tu pareces una loca," like you still look crazy, she stopped relaxing her hair, right? So she kept blow drying it. She stopped relaxing it because she was like, oh, okay, right? So there's just a lot of educating, which can be taxing at times, but I think also deeply beautiful when we do it within community, within our families, around this experience as well. So
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carlos.
Well, my story is different. And it's good to be back home. This is my alma mater, by the way. Mi nombre es Carlos Lisandro Maynard Gemot. That's my name, better known as CLMJ. So if you get an email from me, you will see CLMJ. I was born and raised in Panama City, particularly in a community called Rio Abajo. And I left Panama when I was 18 years old after I finished high school. So when you talk about identity, I have to agree with La Doctora and with Dennis that it is not simple and it will never be simple. So first and foremost, for those who have been at UMass for a while, I know I haven't been back for a while, but those who know me, they know me as El Panameño. And it got to a point where people thought that that was actually my name because I introduced myself that way. I did it purposefully. Why did I do that? When I first came to the US in the early 90s, I was sent to every single nation in the world except where I was from. So, yo soy cubano, yo soy haitiano, yo soy dominicano, soy puertorriqueño. And one of the beauties about it is I traversed through all these cultures and I spent time with all my people, so I pick up cultural distinctives. I pick up their lingo. So even when I will go back home to Panama, peers who knew me that I grew up with, they will say, wait a second, what happened? You don't sound Panamanian. I said, just give me about 12 hours. It'll be right back.
And basically what I'm saying here is that, we don't stay static. We are dynamic people, right? Within the context of the US, right, I identify as an Afro-Latino, and there hasn't been any qualms about it because I'm also an Afro-West Indian as well. So my heritage comes through the West Indian island by way of the motherland, Africa. So for me, it's never been an issue. I never had any questions about it. Even growing up in Panama, I was between what I call two worlds. Panama City and what we know formally as La Zona Canalera, or the Canal Zone area, where the US occupied it for a number of years. So I was between these two worlds. I had grandparents who live in the Canal Zone, and I had grandparents who live in Panama City, so I was back and forth. So I got to experience what I call the complexities of getting to know who I am, and I embraced it from day one. Coming to the US complicated it, because we don't normally use racial markers, even though you can see it in our skin color. We go by nationality and we go by ethnicity. But here, because race is so front and centered, you have to grapple with it, right? And that has been my experience. So in terms of identification, sometimes I even tell people, yo soy el internacional, because I embrace what other cultures offer, but I don't deny who I am and what I'm about. I hope that makes sense to you.
Makes great sense. Woo. So we're going to stay on the theme of identity before I get into some other questions. Context. Anybody here know a gentleman named Ruben Blades? Dear friend of mine from Panama. Known for 47 years, got to work with him closely, toured with him and his band. He was the one that took me to Panama for the first time, and that was where I got to understand more about our complex history that we all have. When we went on tour to Latin American countries, Venezuela, Colombia, the MC, damas y caballeros, y ahora, el estelar, el grupo que hemos estado esperando, Rubén Blades. Blades? I thought it was Blades. Context. B-L-A-D-E-S in Spanish. When you say it's not ble, it's blah, right? So Blades was the name that was given to him by everybody in Latin America except for Panama and those who knew him. When we went to Barbados for a concert, he did a press conference. And he was talking, and all of a sudden he got into a Bayesian accent. Bayesian, my family comes from the West Indies, man. Some elements of a Bayesian, some are from Barbados, and some are from St. Lucie. And so he started explaining how he got the name Blades, English name Blades, because of the West Indies and New Orleans coming to Panama. There's a book about Latin music by a gentleman named Dr. Benjamin Lapidus that has a chapter dedicated to Panamanian musicians, who many of them have English-sounding last names, but they're all from Panama, and they were black. And so it touches on the complexity of being from Panama, having English last names from the West Indies, being black, and then coming to the United States and performing with jazz bands. I'm not going to go deep into that, but just want to suggest, Dr. Benjamin Lapidus, check out the book. Okay? Let's continue on this theme. Context. I didn't come to the United States until I was 20 years old. I transferred from University of Puerto Rico to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. I don't know if any of you know where Ohio is, but it's in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest of the United States. I had an afro. You don't see that now because I'm 72 years old, but trust me, if we were a few years earlier, I would be sitting up here, you see my fro. I had a fro since I was like 12 years old. In any case, I show up to campus. This is going to be a quick story, again, to give context, to give you room to share. First day on campus, I go to have lunch. I noticed the tables were all separate, but there was a long row of tables, and only students of color were sitting at that long row table. And I had no idea why, but I figured I should be sitting there. And after I got my lunch, sat down, I hear all these students talking, and it seemed like they knew each other. They were like, hey, yo, Jay, boom, 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 and they kept on talking. And I was quiet, first day on campus. The young man across me, African American, said, hey, yo, bro, you haven't said anything. I said, so where you from? I said, Puerto Rico. The whole table went quiet. And they all looked at me. And the guy says, Puerto Rico, you Spanish? I said, no, I'm Puerto Rican. I said, speak some Spanish. Speak some Spanish. ¿Está bien? ¿Qué tú quieres saber? Mira, yo nací en Puerto Rico y no sé por qué tú me estás preguntando que te hable a ti. And I figured something was going to go down. And after I said that in Spanish, he says, wow, you are Spanish. I said, no, I'm not. I'm Puerto Rican. Spanish is you're from Spain. I speak Spanish, but I'm from Puerto Rico. And he says, well, you know what? Looking at me square. And everybody's looking at me at the table. He said, you look like a nigger to me. And I said, ooh. Now, let's be mindful. Before I come to the United States at the age of 20, 1970, my parents had told me, look, you're going to find some folks who are going to call you these names, but the last thing I expected that the person was going to call me that name was African American. But when he said it, he was saying it in the sense of, my brother, you look black to me. And I said, well, yeah, I'm black, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm Afro-Puerto Rican. He did not understand that complexity of an Afro-Puerto Rican because in his mind, Puerto Ricans that he had seen in West Side Story, that were all Greek and Italian, looked with a different complexion. And that was the stereotype that was being perpetuated. So therefore, it was hard for him to understand and come to understanding our history. And part of that was because that history was not being told or shared for someone like that young brother. Even though I knew the history of the United States, he did not know the history of the Caribbean, Latin America, and all of us that are part of the diaspora. So I put that in context because you're going to hear context a lot of times as we speak this morning. Dennis, you say identity is somewhat complex. Where'd you go to school?
So I grew up in Cambridge, went to Cambridge Vince and Latin, and from there I went to Howard University. And a little bit of context since, yes.
Pause. Howard University? What is Howard University?
So Howard University is a historically black college.
Got that? All right, continue.
Thank you. So I'm going to just give you this really quick. So I was on a program with Henry Louis Gates called Finding Our Roots. And did my DNA, and it came back that I was 51% of European descent. Phenotypically, I'm black. My father came to Cambridge, Massachusetts to work in the factories at Kendall Square in the late 60s. My mother came from Guam, Puerto Rico to Cambridge to work in the factories at Kendall Square in the late 60s. And I grew up in this tremendous community called Columbia Terrace in Cambridge, which was one of the earliest Latino barrios in the city of Cambridge, where everybody in that community knew that they were Latino. In fact, today I was confirming a little piece of important information in history in our community that Chelia, who was a runner from Guam, Puerto Rico, came in third place in the Boston Marathon in 1976. And so my identity and the formation of my identity happened through three different forces: economy, social, and political. And I'll try to be very brief with this. Socially, every time the marathon runners would come from Puerto Rico, we would pick them up at the airport, we would cheer them on. We were a really tight-knit community. No one ever came into our barrio, no matter where you were from. We safeguarded our neighborhood. We treated everybody with respect. Our parents worked like heck, and so we developed a really strong work ethic. And so identity was never something that we questioned, whether I was phenotypically black or not. Politically, no matter where you are in the state of Massachusetts, you look at the statistics from the Gaston Institute, you know that we're a community with a lot of challenges. And so when I graduated from Howard University, coming out of Howard University, having a better understanding of me being black, Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Latino, I mounted a campaign for the Massachusetts State Legislature in 1996. When there was nobody at the State House who was Latino. And we organized the entire community in Cambridge. It was the first time in the history of my mother being in the United States that she ever voted. The entire community was animated, and I actually ran as an independent, didn't even run as a Democrat. Why? Because I did not identify with the Democratic Party, right? And so identity formed around politics in this race to be the first Latino since Nelson Merced to serve us in the State House. I lost that race, but it was instrumental in the formation of who I am as a person, because every Latino, regardless of whether you were Puerto Rican, Dominican, Colombian, organized for a particular cause. The last piece I'll mention is the economic piece, which is really, really critical. Identity does not live by itself. It lives through us, and it lives through our community. It lives through our businesses. I grew up working in a bodega. That helped shape my identity. Part of the problem that we're seeing today is that oftentimes through social media and other places, that identity is seen as something that is somewhat theoretical. It's not theoretical, it's alive. It's something that we struggle with every single day, right? When I went to Howard University, first couple of years I dealt with the fact that many said that you're not black, right? But I understood that I was part of the black diaspora, right? I am not someone that is going to be on the defense about who I am as a person. I know who I am as a person because my formation and my identity goes back to the beginning of time. So I think that through the complexity and to the context, for all of us, and this has already been mentioned, identity is something that should bring us together, whether you're Afro-Latino, whether you are South American, whether you are Mexican. It's something that should bring us together. It is not something that should be defined by whether or not we call ourselves Latinx, or Afro-Latino, or Hispanic, or because you're light-skinned, or because you're dark-skinned. The problem of the tragic mulatto goes back to American literature, 18th, 19th, 20th century. So issues of identity have been around for a really, really long time. And the best advice that I can give you guys as young people here is that don't ever question your identity. Force yourself to participate with your community, force yourself to engage yourself with community, and your identity will naturally emerge from that interaction with people in your community that look like you and that have the same, for the most part, same goals and aims in mind.
Thank you. All right. Hold on a second. Dr. Nova, riding on what you said earlier and what Dennis just shared and what I shared earlier about Antioch, for me, the Antioch experience that day, what it did for me was flip the switch that said my role then has to be the bridge, el puente. The bridge between cultures and ethnicities, and in particular, those of us who are African descendants, so we would understand that we had much more in common than we had different. And therefore, me, it was important at that moment in time, that lunch that I had was the lunch that said, you're going to move in a path in which you're going to start forming collaborations and solidarity with others who are black. And by black, I meant they could be black from Cuba, from Venezuela, from Panama, from Colombia, from the United States, from Jamaica, from Bahamas. I don't care. I was going to form solidarity through our blackness. I would celebrate my identity as a Puerto Rican and my ethnicity, but I would make sure that my purpose in life would be collaboration, solidarity amongst people of color. So that then brings us a positive or a challenge. I'm going to skip just to Dr. Nova. Tell me about the challenges.
Oof. The challenges are many, but I'll sort of jump to the end by saying that the end result can be really magical. And I've seen, I think, as you were speaking, I started, because we're obviously in a higher ed institution, I went in memory back to college, which is really where I started sort of experimenting with what it looked like to be the bridge, to bring folks together. And then I jumped all the way to a year ago when I was working with Mayor Wu and her campaign and the coalition building that we did through her work, and sort of the ultimate impact of that across our city and getting her elected. So a lot just just happened in my brain. But I'll start at college, because we're here and y'all are here. And I think that this is a space that really can be anything you want it to be. And I mentioned previously that I was like, I got to college literally day one, and I was like, where's the Latino Cultural Center? Because I was coming from this context, I was super white. And I was like, please, God, I need medicine immediately. So I immersed myself in that space, but again, was very much in the minority there because most students were of Mexican descent and Puerto Rican descent. And so when I got there, the Dominican Student Association was just starting on campus. It was less than a year old. So I was there right on time. And this is just for context, this is 2006. And so get there, realize that DSA is kind of un punto y aparte within the Latino Cultural Center. Phenotypically, we're we're a little different. And then just in terms of how we move, right? The way that we come together, the way we celebrate, it was different. Our food, it was different. And so I'm proud to say that, when I became president of the organization in my sophomore year, I put a stake in the ground. I was like, y'all, we got to partner with the African American Cultural Center. We got to do collab events with them. We got to make sure that the West Indian Student Organization knows that we're here and want to work together. We are the West Indies too. And so there was a lot that was done in that time of my sort of young adulthood, exploring what are the issues that impact all of us. And I think a lot of it really was found in the familial realm. And those conversations really brought us together. I remember very clearly, I believe it was in 2010, with the hurricane that swept through Haiti, and a lot of collaborative effort and understanding as Dominicans, our responsibility as neighbors to ally ourselves and ensure that we're activating the campus, because just as it hit Haiti, could have easily just gone like this and hit the DR. Right? And so a lot of that activism started when I was in that time period. And I'll then jump to sort of the most recent history, which, brought me to serve as Mayor Wu's transition director, which, just to be clear, wildest experience of my life. My background is as a classroom teacher, community organizer, educator, and sort of community advocate, and had been supporting her campaign, and she extended this invitation. We sort of had this kindred connection, and I said, absolutely, then had a panic attack, 0% lying there. I was like, oh my God. But how can you say no to the opportunity to be that bridge for my entire city, the city that raised me? And part of why I so deeply believed in her candidacy was because I saw the ways in which she was creating cross-cultural coalition. Boston, those of us who know it well, know that it is highly segmented, in many ways by design and through oppressive practices over the course of generations. But regardless of that, the present reality, unfortunately, too often is that it is very segregated. You can actually pinpoint, these streets are where these folks are. This is where they are, and it causes a lot of pain, and it causes, frankly, political disenfranchisement, because it prevents us from coming together and being able to build political power together to advocate for the resources that all of our communities need across the board. And so with Mayor Wu's campaign, what I really saw was an activation of all of us. And so when I came in and started seeing that we were doing phone banking in multiple languages, I swear to you, I was crying on the phone, because I've done phone banking for national races before. And then here I am in my community. Her office was directly across, this is serendipity, directly across from the apartment building my family first moved to when we came to the US, above Yesenia's Market on the corner of Washington Street and Green Street. That's where her campaign office was. So here I am, looking through the glass at the apartment I grew up in, calling folks in Boston in Spanish, talking to people like, mi tía, ay, mija, dime, cuéntame de ese, and I'm just having I had one 20-minute conversation, not the best use of my time, but it was like, our people, for the first time, in a very concerted and intentional way, are being brought into the political conversation, activated, really informed, because a lot of this is also a lack of education, right? And so really thinking of myself, like, how can I be a bridge? How can I use sort of the privilege that I've gained through the spaces I've walked to be able to sort of like, vengan pa acá, like come through here. And that's what I really felt with this campaign, was the opportunity to do that at a grand scale, to think about how we build bridges, as Bostonians, and think about the fact that, I believe, was the wealth study mentioned already, the 2015 wealth study that found that the median household income for white Bostonians was like $275,000 a year, and for black Bostonians, like African Americans, $8 a year, and for Dominicans, it was $0. You'll notice I cry a lot. I cried when I read that, because it felt so true. It was my lived experience and that of my family. And I was like, this is so completely messed up, right? And I'm sure if we kept sort of cutting the data, and what does that look like for the Vietnamese, in Boston? What does that look like for, it's just like, we know those numbers are gonna be equally low. So I think, again, as folks who are transgressive by nature, because we do not just check one box, I think there's also a magical opportunity to stand in gaps and bring folks together that aren't usually sort of at the same table. And I've been blessed that I've gotten the opportunity to do that, as young as high school, college, and as recently, in my career as, right now.
All right. Woo! I can serve as a witness to what Dr. Noah just said, because I was part of all the great work that she brought to the campaign and after the election. I'm going to ask Carlos, and then both Bea and Maria, I'm going to ask you challenge and opportunity of us as Afro-Latinos, Afro-Latinas in coalition building and making it so that we understand the complexity, but at the same time, why, as a coalition, we're stronger than fighting with each other. Carlos.
Two things I would say. One, we need to actually unveil the dominant narrative. That's the first thing. We got to bring it to the surface because it's been hiding for too long. So that's one thing. Secondly, I find that we are not each other's enemies, right? We are fighting against the wrong enemy. We actually should be forging together to create pathways for those who are perhaps struggling more than we have, and to open doors so that they can advance. So one thing that I've learned in my journey is that I'm pretty open to listen, one, also to learn. As much as I may know, there's still much to be known and learned. And it's not just gonna happen among those who identify as Latino, Latinx, Latina, Hispanics, right? We have to cross those lines. And because of our complexities, we are in a great place to be the bridge builders because we can identify with multiplicities of groups given what we bring to the table, right? We have the African ancestry, but we also have the indigenous ancestry. You may not see it in me, but I have it also, right? So we have to be able to sort of change our perspective and recognize that if we can come together and recognize that, as Jose said, we're actually stronger together, then we can really go after the structural and systemic issues that are often prevent us from moving forward. But let's not fight among each other.
Amen,
let's
amen,
not
amen.
fight between each other and within.
Amen. I love that. Thank you. Marie or Bea? Go ahead. Go ahead, Marie. Beto?
I wanted to bring a quote in from this book that I think is still really very relevant to the conversation, but let me find it. I think it's right here. So it came up, this quote came up for me as I was reading, and then when Maria, you first started talking, and Bea, you first started talking about family. And thinking back, because sure, we can say we should all work together, and it's better if we work together, but there's a lot of introspection that we all need to do to like, why can't we work together better? What were the messages that we were given as children, that we were given in our families, that make it so we're infighting or fighting against purposes, right? So this quote really jumped out at me. So I'm gonna read it, it's in Spanish, but I'll translate it too. So this is, like I said, this is our cousin Benito grew up in Puerto Rico, grew up in Ponce, and he talks about in the book how he grew up on a mainly white street, right? In Ponce, there were lots of different communities, segregated communities, right? But that he and his family grew up on a street that was mainly blancos, white folks. And so this is a quote from Benito's mother that he's kind of his remembrances. So he says, "Como somos los únicos negros en esta calle, tenemos que portarnos bien porque para ellos tenemos que portarnos bien para que ellos no den quejas de uno." Right? So estos son los mensajes, so I'll say it again. So he said, because we're the only black folks on this street, this is his mom saying this to him, we have to basically, we have to behave well because we don't want anybody to complain. Thank you, gracias. And we really, we get a lot of those messages, right? No tenemos que portar bien. We have to behave. And I think that's part of what we need to step out of, too. To say we need to take some risks. We need to, figure out ways where, we're, making good trouble. Right?
Good trouble.
Good trouble. So that's a plug also for the podcast that Mass Budget is doing with King Boston called Good Trouble.
You hear that?
So tune in. You can find it on Spotify and other places.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. But that's a good point because Carlos also stated we have to really focus on the narrative and who's sharing this narrative historically that has placed folks of color in certain places based on their perspective that will allow them to continue to have power, that will allow them to continue to have privilege, that will allow them to feel entitled. And so, Bea, touch on what we just heard here from your perspective.
Of course. Thank you so much. I love that quote. I think that oftentimes in order to fit in, right, it often meant just be a little bit more palatable, and it's just it's drowning, right? Because it really means don't be you, which then means if I can't be me, then there must be something wrong, right? There must be something different, and it starts with the hair, straightening your hair. Oftentimes it starts with letting people mispronounce your name. My name is Beyasmin. And in middle school, I let my friends call me Jasmine, So it's like, it's all of these small things that over time really build up. And now I'm super proud of my name, and I'm really grateful that my family gave me this strange name. and I proclaim it, and I make sure to correct folks on how to say it well, and I make sure to let them know, I'm proud of that name. My grandmother gave me that name. So, Dennis, I'm going to put you on the spot because you and I have had a lot of good conversations. I worked in Cambridge, and I think we worked a few blocks away. And at the time, some Dominican activists like Dennis, had stood up to say that they were no longer going to visit Dominican Republic when they put out this really racist citizenship law against Haitian-born Dominicans. And Dennis and many others wrote a letter and made sure it got to the right people, saying that they were going to pull back in the best way that you can in a capitalist system, which was that they were not going to spend their dollars traveling and visiting DR. And things have started to change, and again, people have had conversations. But I remember being able to go to your office and be like, what should we do? I want to go to La Romana, and I would spend summers there, and I was kind of really conflicted. I don't really want to give up my isla, but I also know that there is a way to take a stance. And I'm sharing that story just to say that I think we have a lot of power in the way that we choose to activate our activism, whether it's through political representation, through the policy like Marie Francis is doing at Mass Budget, or entrepreneurship. I think that there are so many ways that we can choose to proclaim our identity and be this bridge that we keep talking about, and making sure that we're saying we're going to do things a little bit different now, and we're not afraid anymore. And I think our parents didn't often have that privilege. That's why the portarte bien was really important. Behaving well was really important, because they didn't have perhaps that agency that I think many of us now sitting here finally have, maybe for the first time, in our families and in our community. So, and I've heard that from other friends as well. I have, again, a really beautiful network, and I've had conversations with friends from Asian descent. It's pretty much the same story. We came here as immigrants, and we don't make a lot of noise, and we work our job, and we go home, and we don't watch the news, and we don't protest, and we don't do all of that. And all of a sudden, our generation is saying, well, that's just gonna give us the same result, so that's not gonna work for us. So I'm proud to use my activism, and I found ways, whether it's through writing or whether it's through literally just speaking up and sitting here and sharing my story with you, which I hope really helps the next generation, which I have already seen is even bolder and more braver than we are. And that makes me really proud.
All right. Cindy, I think, Cindy, you've set us up, because I could go on all afternoon, take a pause, come back, and continue into the night. The subject matter, in my opinion, is deeper than just a few minutes we're able to share with you. But I want to make sure we touch on a couple other topics before we open it up to questions, and then we have, the closing of the program. Two things come to mind. One is, you speak about our agency. This one's a light one, then I want to get into a deeper one. The light one is the following. There's an African proverb that says, until the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the hunter will always be glorified. If you've heard that one, until the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the hunter will always be glorified. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to interview a gentleman for whom I have a lot of respect and admiration, a pianist by the name of Jesus Chucho Valdez, just celebrated his 81st birthday, Afro-Cuban. He'll be performing tomorrow at Berkeley Performance Center. I think it's a solo concert. His new performance is a work titled The Creation. It's a 4-suite big band presentation of the creation from the perspective of the Yoruban religion of Santeria y Regla de Ocha. He's using this as a way of saying this is the way the creation occurred. And when I spoke to him, he said, we have Africa in all of our IDs. He said, everyone. Softball, then deep. Dennis, if you and I walk into La Fábrica and you give me a tour, what's the first room with the bar that I'm going to go into?
So La Fábrica that Jose just referred to is a restaurant, jazz lounge, and nightclub that I own and operate in Cambridge that has about 80 employees, 95% of them black and brown. So we're really proud of that. The first room that you walk into at La Fábrica is the Eddie Palmieri Jazz Lounge.
What do I see on the walls in the Eddie Palmieri Jazz Lounge?
So what you see on the walls throughout La Fábrica.
But let's start off with the lounge before we get into the big room.
You see a picture that was painted by a well-known graffiti artist in Boston. His name is Gio, of Eddie Palmieri, Johnny Pacheco, and Celia Cruz.
Why do you have those particular pictures on the walls of the Eddie Palmieri Lounge?
Because in life, you've got to pay respects to those that paved the way for us to have venues like that.
Let's now follow you in this virtual, non-virtual tour that you're giving us into the main room where Giovanna Heike, a renowned Puerto Rican chef, owns the space of the kitchen. And I'm sitting at one of the tables. What do I see as I walk into that main room on my left side?
So on the left side, you'll see a very large picture that was taken by Hector Pina several years ago in La Romana en el Batey of Haitians cutting sugarcane in the Dominican Republic. La Fábrica, the name is how you make rum from sugarcane, and the trapiche is our logo. And so you see manifestations of sugarcane and ox and everything related to cutting sugarcane.
Why that picture in particular of Haitians cutting sugar?
So you mentioned earlier the history behind Dominicans and Haitians. And Puerto Ricans, to a certain extent, have an integral part of that history, as well as Cuba, where sugarcane was one of the most important crops. That picture is there for a couple of reasons. One is that it's very rare to walk into any restaurant anywhere in Massachusetts and see
Or the United States.
see images of black people on the wall. I cannot operate a restaurant where the theme is sugarcane without at least honoring those individuals, particularly in the Dominican Republic, that cut the sugarcane. And so those individuals that are on our walls, and there's several, are individuals that I've actually met, I've talked to. It was part of the research and the homework that I did for opening up the restaurant. And for me, as an Afro Latino, putting it in context, it's important for us to honor and preserve the history of people that in many respects live like many of our slaves lived back in the 18th and 19th century in the Dominican Republic.
That was purposeful. So that softball question I just asked, I asked my other four friends, using your agency, how do you change the narrative so that we are the lions? Carlos.
Well, for me as an educator, I have the honor to be in spaces with groups of students practically every single day of the week. And that is my platform to shift the narrative. And one of the beauties, at least for me, is it's not just what I learn in the classroom, it's what I learn in life. And they kind of come together full circle within that space. So as much as I may be an educator and I'm sort of the person in the position to foster an environment of learning, one of the things that I've discovered is oftentimes I'm equally learning as much from my students than what they learn from me. So I've changed the way I started teaching years ago. It's very much a collaborative approach. It's a co-learning approach because the students have as much to offer to the learning process as much as I do, and that's how it's beginning to change. The other thing that we also do is we don't just expose them to community engagement within the campus. We also go outside and allow them to do what I call that cross comparison, and even within their own neighborhoods, they're able to unpack what is present and what is missing, and ask the question why. Because they're going to be the next agents of change when they're in a position to do so.
I'm getting a signal here. So what are you asking me? Time for Q&A. Q&A? All right. We're going to Q&A, but I need just 1 second. Any of you three, how do you use your agency to change the narrative so that we are lions telling the story? Any of you? Dr. Nova?
I'm just going to call out briefly the notion of everyday anti-racism. It's an amazing text for those of you who are nerds and want to check it out. But I think I've had to learn to oscillate between sort of what I like to think of as like immediate and local interventions and then systemic interventions through just how I live my life and then the work that I do. And I think a way that I keep myself from this sense of despair in the times that we live in that are pretty painful and challenging is by thinking through the lens of everyday anti-racism. What are the acts at this table when we're just saying hello or wherever that I can do to interrupt and intervene just regularly? How do I embody that as a human being rather than have to sort of show up through like large acts of whatever it may be? So
Love it, love it.
I will say, I was going to also talk about anti-racism and the work that I do in talking about an anti-racist state budget or anti-racist city budgets and how we use public money. The state budget is $50 billion a year. City budgets are billions of dollars a year. How do we make sure that that's our money, it's the people's money? How are we using that money to actually create anti-racist change in our communities? And I get to talk about that with people. So
That's why we need to be at the table to make sure that occurs. Give them a big round of applause. More to talk about. How are we going to do this?
We need a lunch date.
You wanted to say something, Bella? Go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, you want? I was like, I'm good. Like, y'all said everything. I think I'm really intentional about how I spend my money.
Okay.
Like, if my earrings are like from a Latina store, I'll go to La Fabrica or Mira, like a black-owned business. I like really try my best
Fubu.
to spend with our people. Yeah.
Forest bias. Forest bias. All right. Any questions out here? If there are questions, raise your hand, and then I will navigate to you. If you don't have a question, I'm going to keep on talking. So let's see. Questions? Anyone? Sister, you got to identify who you are when you ask the question because we need to know who's asking the question. Hold on a second. Stand, please. I love your shirt. I love your blouse. Come on, I'm not embarrassing you.
So, I am an artist.
Give your name.
I have very interesting names.
Go ahead.
Because my mother gave me the name Ramona, but I reclaimed my African heritage. I call myself Ajwa Ma'aza, and it represents West African energy of a female child born on Monday. And Ma'aza is from the great Ethiopian civilizations, one of the countries in Africa that was never conquered by the Europeans. So, my question is this. I know you all have heard that people who look like us in Los Angeles are being called by Mexicans changuitos. And, you know, Mexicans are the largest Latino population here in the United States. And very interesting that they usually say they don't know anything about black people in their country, but there was slavery in Mexico, and there are fabulous large areas in Mexico of people of African ancestry, one of them called Guerrero, which is the warriors. You know, my engagement with Mexican people is that they are not aware of the contributions of Africans in their country. And when we talk with them about the contributions of Africans here in America, they don't know about that either. And I, you know, would like to see that there is some presence that nationally would address from the Afro-Latino community this ignorance of Mexicans about their own heritage of African peoples. And is this something that you all would be willing to work on, to have some type of a organization that would address these issues that we're having with Mexicans.
All right. Before you all jump into this, so I think A, not every Mexican is not aware of their history. B, not every Mexican is not aware of blacks being part of their makeup. But I would say that, again, the narrative that when I say until the lion tell the story of the hunter will always be glorified. Remember, Western Hemisphere has been colonized. It wasn't just the USA. It wasn't just the USA. So that includes the Caribbean and Latin America, which therefore meant that there was a narrative in which the colonizer wanted to perpetuate a certain standard of who had power and who was worthy. And if within that narrative, those who had been captured in Africa were brought to the Western Hemisphere and enslaved, they would make sure that those who were enslaved were the least of those who had power and agency to share their narrative. And so that meant that the whole societal structure is no different than the societal structure here in the United States as far as systemic racism that's institutionalized. You find that in every single country, regardless if you're in Puerto Rico. It wasn't until last year that the University of Puerto Rico finally opened up a study having to do with the African history of Puerto Ricans. Last year. So my answer to you is basically saying that we have to understand that the powers to be didn't start yesterday. They've been there for centuries, stating how they want the ecosystem of humanity to work, so those who could be in power looked a certain way and had a certain background, and those who did not and were oppressed definitely did not look like them. And that included the indigenous communities that were wiped out and those from Africa that were brought to the New World and enslaved. And so I want to say that by stating that the purpose of this group and others is to address what you just said. It's not organizing a new organization. I think that the work that we do, every single one of us daily, is to open up the minds of our own communities to understand that we cannot shy away from our own baggage. I could give you a whole story, and it'll be part of my book, having to do with my context within the Latino community and racism. And so it didn't surprise me when I read, if you haven't read what's going on in LA, there have been some conversations that were held by 3 of the city councilors who happen to be of Mexican descent. And they were speaking about the adopted son of one of the fellow city councilor. He and his husband have adopted a black child, and they call him Changuito, meaning monkey. And then they were talking about certain things that they wanted to do where they were seeing, again, the fight for power, where they were saying, these guys are black, and therefore we can't allow them to continue to have power when we're the majority of people. And so the role that we play, sister, is that the agency that every one of us here on stage has is to be the clarion call to make sure that amongst ourselves, we're the first ones to raise our voices and say, time out. We don't play that game. So it's not about us forming a new organization. It's about us continuing our work, continuing to collaborate, continuing to be transparent in what we're trying to do so that others understand. And so I think using the arts like you do, using the arts like I do, using the arts like if you look at the Globe today, you'll see an article on the High Square Task Force, a mural that's being painted in the Mozart Park, which again is another way of using art as a way of celebrating our Africanism, but also our Latino heritage, and at the same time educating, informing, connecting. When you're going to see that mural, you're going to see Bob Marley, you're going to see other people on that mural. So I wanted to take a minute just to share that with you, to understand and put in context. Your question is a good question, but at the same time, it's not, in my opinion, humbly, I would say to you, it's not about forming another organization. We don't need to do that. It's about us continuing to educate, inform, mobilize, and connect with folks to make sure and raise our voice You heard earlier from Bea talking about Haiti and Dominican Republic. This gentleman right here, Dennis Bensan, is one of my heroes, him and Juno Diaz and also Hector Pina, because they took front and center and got hit from all sides of the Dominican community here in Boston because they stood up and said, this is racist. As Dominicans, we cannot do this. And they got hit hard. Check it out on the globe, you'll find it right there. Called let's not even go there. Anyway, what I want to say is that part of our work, what you bring light to, is the continuation of our taking agency, using agency to break down those barriers, educate, inform, and mobilize, and bring folks to understand who they are, but also understand the history of where it came from and why that continues to be perpetuated in these countries. Does that help you a little bit?
Jose, if I may, just want to add just a little piece to that, because I think this is a really important topic for us. On my way here, I haven't been to UMass in quite a few years. I was really impressed by all the young students that are coming to school here. It brought a great deal of joy to me, and it really filled my heart to see that, because education is really important. And the issue that you raised is an issue that we face all over this world, right? It's not just Mexicans, it's Dominicans and Haitians, it's Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, it's blacks on blacks in this country. It's a legacy of slavery. And so the best place to address those issues, utilizing one of the most important tools that we have under the Constitution, the First Amendment, is to have deep conversations here on campus. It doesn't have to happen through an organization, right? I was discriminated against in the Dominican Republic about 15 years ago. I was not admitted into a nightclub. I happened to be with Juno Diaz that day and several other friends. I was told that I could not enter the club because I was a Negro. The Dominican Republic does not have discriminatory laws. And so we filed a lawsuit utilizing international human rights law. Until this day, I'm still waiting for a hearing before the tribunal. Even though a camera followed me into the Palacio de Justicia as I submitted the complaint, I still have not received a hearing. And so we've got to be careful not to get worked up about these racist incidents that happen consistently throughout this country. What we need to do is form businesses for black and brown people and employ them, make sure that we're getting involved politically, make sure that we're organizing, make sure that we're having these conversations with our families, make sure that our children are understanding the deepness of these conversations and that they're spending time in those respective countries that we're from, because that's how you learn. So there's a lot of work for us to do. And the most important work that we can do here on this campus, and those of us in, we've shared this already, is unity and solidarity, regardless of whether you're Afro-Latino, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, Black, African-American, West Indian, African, whatever you are. We've got to come together to address these issues and work together and learn how to work with each other. And I think that will be the best way for us to sustain change over time.
All right. So we'll have a sideline, but basically where we get to is our work collectively, all of us here, needs to be one that we continuously understand systemic change needs to happen if we're going to get equity and we're going to have justice for all. I saw two more hands, but where are we at? What time are we at? We'll have a performance at this moment? Oh, man, I'm like, shh. We're going to have Bob, Robert, Tony, we're going to have a sideline conversation after the performance so that way we can answer the question and make the comment because we need to go. Wait, look. Georgiana, come here.
I need to just say one thing because I feel like it has to be echoed in the room because I really I heard you. And I think there's a lot of black pain that goes unacknowledged. There are umbrella Latinx organizations that already exist that are not serving us. And a lot of them are led by the sort of majority Latinx group, which is of Mexican descent. So there is real housekeeping that has to be done. And I think internal work, there's anti-Blackness in all of our countries, as I think was echoed. But I don't want that it goes left unsaid, that there's real harm done when these things happen, and it's done by our own.
Yes.
And so.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Tone, you're going to hold your question. Robert, you're going to hold your question. I'm going to hand it over here. Let's give the panel a big round of applause again, please. What I realized, because of the pandemic, besides broadcasting my show on WBUR, I'm now doing a live broadcast every Sunday on Facebook and YouTube. I'm going to invite each one of my friends on the panel to join me individually so we can have a deep dive conversation in the weeks and months to come. And therefore, we can expand on some of the things that you heard here. Would you accept my invitation? And we'll do it together as well. Yeah, you got it. You kidding me? I got space. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to turn it over to you. You got it.
I think we're going to have to, is this still working? Okay, I think we're going to have to add professor to your title.
Oh, okay. I'll take that. Honorary.
Well, thank you so much. And if you're feeling like I'm feeling, there's a lot of feelings, actually. There's a lot of pride in hearing all of your comments and your experiences. There's a lot of sadness and a lot of joy. And so I appreciate your vulnerability and for your time. Thank you. I am going to do another PSA before I introduce our performer. On Tuesday, October 18th, we are launching a campus climate study. We're looking at learning more about our racial climate on campus. It's for students only, and it will go for a whole month. So you have a month to fill this out. So tell your classmates that we really do want to learn more about what the climate is like, and so that we can work together on making UMass Boston a more welcoming place for everyone. So, more on that. It is my pleasure to introduce our performer for this morning, Ana Tinajero, who's an award-winning Afro-Latin dance artist. Come on up, beautiful. Award-winning Afro-Latin dance artist and performing arts curator who loves engineering spaces for community connection and conversation through arts. She has spread the salsa bug to more than 30 countries and is the founder of Dance to Power, an online Afro-Latin dance academy. Through her social impact initiatives, Ana advocates for LGBTQ inclusivity and gender and racial equity in the arts. We are so excited to have you.
Hola, buenos días. Hi. Well, first of all, I just want to say it's a huge honor to be here with you this morning. I'm amazingly honored to be in any way, shape, or form with the peers that have been on the stage. They're people whom I look up to and I learn from, and I hope in some way I can continue to also, through my work, lift up their work, as I know that I'm here for their shoulders, whose shoulders I stand on. So, my name is Ana Tinajero. I am an Afro-Latin dancer and performance art curator. I want to acknowledge my privilege here that I know I'm a light-skinned cisgender Latina. And my work is about lifting up racial equity in the arts and making space for more voices and untold stories that are not in the room, but that are in our communities. Those are the ones that shape us and that give us that power to be able to bring more of our community forward with us. I love to let the work speak for itself. So I'm not necessarily introducing my work, but what I'm going to say is that I love to lift up a couple things for you if you are interested in also building up more Afro-Latinidad within the arts. As Jose Masso had mentioned earlier, art is such a powerful tool for us to be able to build more of our conversations forward. It's one thing to talk about it and another thing sometimes to experience and connect with it in a different way. And for Black and brown communities, we know that we have a very heavy intrinsic and cultural connection to our art. And that is also what helps shape and push our conversations conversations forward. There, I do a little bit of work with the Mass Cultural Council, who's the state governing, the state agency for arts funding. And I'd love to lift that we have some grants for individual artists that people can apply for. And it's for cultural entrepreneurs, people who work in the cultural spaces. So if you want to see more Afro-Latinos in the arts coming out here, you want to support their work, I really am mentioning to you and lifting that this grant is out there, that people can apply for this. Tell your friends, tell your communities. Also, the work from the photos and the videos that I'm going to be using in my presentation are from Vania Arroyo, who's with us here today, our photographer. And if you want to follow her work, please check out on IG, Black Brown Boston, and make sure that you follow that. Vanya's really lifting up voices and stories in our community, so I highly want to lift that up. With that said, thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of that. Thank you.
Tell me about your life. How do you measure your joy? And how are you practicing to get free? I measure my joy by cross steps and Suzy cues, by right turns and wawankos. The dance floor is my tapestry, that one place I feel completely present with my body, the dance floor, and the rhythm. I grew up on norteñas and Tejano music. See, you know you're Chicana when you know the words to every Selena song and you learned about love through Marimar. We don't get to know each other to feel an instant kinship when they play Bidi Bidi Bom Bom at the club and everyone began singing. Then I found salsa and I went from crashing quinceañeras to borrowing IDs. I'd practice my shoulder rolls in the bathroom mirror. And every time someone walked in, I'd pretend I was washing my face. I swear I had the cleanest face. Now, if you were to ask me what I love about salsa, it's the simple moments where you find a little corner away from the madness of the world and just let your mind slip away. Yo mido mi alegría con cross steps y Suzy cues, con vueltas y guaguancos. Where do we go when our mind disappears? Cuando la mente se nos va. I pushed away the dancer during COVID. See, joy was not present. You get tired of being that token queer Latina, being asked to consult on DEI work while having to advocate for payment. And no, I don't need to hear about how you can't dance and have two left feet when I tell you I dance salsa. I want to hear how we can work together. It feels like a lifetime ago when people were posting Black squares on social media, releasing Black Lives Matter statements. Meanwhile, artists of color were asked to bare our souls for funding. Tell me, how do you measure impact? Joy. Why should the gatekeepers of the world fund your art? I mean, healing. I mean, art. I mean, healing. 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 Why should we fund your healing? This roadmap to discovery, these moments of happiness, of unlearning, of softening, when the mind is finally allowed to disappear. I think about rhythm as a dance with time. So I dance for me time today. This recipe for healing, for moments of black and brown joy we don't lift up enough. Here we measure our joy by cross steps and Suzy Q's, by vueltas y guaguancos. Here the count ends at 8 and life begins a clave. Here you ask por un baile and you get the love of Celia Cruz, La Lupe, Selena, Gloria Estefan. Here our rhythm is our heartbeat, because these are the moments that soften us. Here I don't need to explain to you why my art matters, because here we simply matter.
Wow. Can we just give her another round of applause? I know we mentioned that she was award-winning. That was an epic performance. I'm sure many of you have seen her perform in other settings. This is my first time, and easily one of the most impressive displays of artistic and cultural expression that I've ever seen. So thank you for blessing us with that wonderful, wonderful performance and powerful message, more importantly. I also want to thank our panelists for your insightful words. Thank you. Your stories helped educate us. Here at UMass Boston, we promote lifelong learning. So regardless of what age someone is in the room, regardless of their background, whether they're a student, staff, faculty member, community member, we want to continue to learn. And the best way that we can learn is to listen, to read, to study, to travel, to expose ourselves to ideas outside of our own predisposed biases, right? Many of us grew up in certain parts of the world. We were socialized in certain ways. We gravitated to certain ideas and beliefs. Not saying that they're correct or incorrect, but there are other perspectives. And it's really important to honor all of the perspectives and all of the experiences. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone, our committee, everyone who's here. There are some committee members who are not here. who helped organize this. There are so many great events that take place here at UMass Boston. We want to thank all you attendees for being here, to listen, giving your time. Thank you. I specifically want to recognize all of our sponsors as well: Academic Support Services and Undergraduate Education, Black Life, Gaston Institute, McCormick Graduate School, Racial Equity Task Force, Office of Community Partnerships, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Student Affairs, and Trotter Institute. So this event is a part of our Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. We did it intentionally a couple weeks before our Black Lives Matter Day, which will be back here in the same room, November 7th. The title of our theme for that event is A Beautiful Resistance, Black Excellence Through Artistic Expression and Leadership. So all of you who are present today really set the stage for that event, and we certainly extend our invitation to you to come back and be a part of that event. We have a number of community artists. We have students on campus who will be a part of the event, and so we want to thank all of you for coming out and celebrating. Don't let this be the end. As the panelists provided to us a charge, these conversations need to continue to happen within our families, within our friend groups, within circles that we may disagree with others, right? Those conversations still need to happen. Relationships still need to be built. Healing needs to happen individually as well as collectively. So once again, thank you all for being here. I believe the panelists may have a few moments if you'd like to come up and say hello. But thank you all, and stay tuned for more programs and collaborative efforts. Thank you.